This 911 Strong podcast is brought to you by our partners at the Police Credit Union of California.
As a financial institution founded by law enforcement for law enforcement and their families over 65 years ago, they have the experience and understanding to help you with all your financial needs,
including exclusive products designed specifically for law enforcement professionals. To become a member today, visit thepolicecu.org. That's the police, the letter C, and the letter U.org.
Or call 800-222-1391 and tell them you heard about them from the 911 Strong podcast. Hey friends, welcome to this episode of the 911 Strong podcast with me. I almost said prodcast.
You're always tripping up at the beginning.
I know. Maybe you should do the intros.
Hi guys, welcome to the podcast with Aram and Kristen.
Hi.
Hey, it's the 911 Strong podcast. I forgot to say the name.
All right.
We both have issues.
Yes. Well, this is going to be an interesting episode. We're going to talk about some startling stats. You and I had talked about this pre-show. When we talk about dangerous jobs, a lot of people assume that police officers would be at the top of the list of profession, but it's not. Actually, there's some dangerous jobs at the top of the list. I think one of them was lobster catchers. They go out there and deep sea lobster catchers and stuff like that. But police actually rank in like the number 20, 21 area for dangerous jobs. But in that same research, I found a startling stat that was surprising, especially with the lack of attention this brings. And this one focuses at police suicide. This 2019 study that we're going to discuss talks about how police are at the highest risk for suicide of any profession. That's number one. Not something you want to be number one at. So we'll be discussing this on the next episode of the 911 Strong podcast that starts
right now.
Station to all units.
Prepare to copy.
You're listening to the 911 Strong podcast.
Don't act like I never told you.
With Aram and Kristen, bringing you stimulating discussion.
No, I like the sound of that.
An entertaining conversation.
And now, here's Kristen and Aram.
Hey friends, welcome to this episode of the 911 Strong podcast. With me as always is my good friend Kristen.
Hi.
Well, today we have a special guest. Our special guest is a master resiliency instructor from the FBI National Academy. She travels the nation and speaks at the FBI Academy, talking to students, mostly comprised of law enforcement professionals, about resiliency and the warning signs when it comes to wellness and lack of wellness for that matter. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our special guest, my co-host, Kristen.
Oh my gosh, the way you do that intro. Now I'm like on the spot. Thank you.
So now you know how our guests feel sometimes.
Yeah, I do. That's a little nerve-wracking now. I have to like own up to it.
Well, I wanted to put a little pressure on you because the pressure that you feel from this intro and that, that gave you a little bit of angst and anxiety.
It did.
Can you imagine what people that are going through personal problems might be feeling? I mean, the amount of anxiety is amplified thousands of times, right?
Yeah.
And I know you're no stranger to this because you're an expert in this matter. But when you teach these classes, how is it received? I think you've told me that a lot of officers are reluctant to discuss it.
Yeah. It's just, I think because we as law enforcement associate any type of vulnerability to weakness. And so what this class is it's getting you to really open up and be vulnerable, and you're being vulnerable in front of your peers, which is something that we don't do, right? Like we don't, talk about the tough calls or anything like that. We just kind of brush it off because in our generation, at least, what were we told, right? We were told to like shake it off and to grow thick skin and to stop whining and just go to the next call. And so those senior to us as well, they don't understand why generations below them are starting to have problems with all of these issues, and it's coming from the older generation where most of them have had multiple marriages and divorces, and their kids want nothing to do with them because they are so work driven and put that as their priority over everything else because they want to just keep climbing that ladder, and they don't think about the consequences after they retire. So I think, I don't know what the dates are. I guess I could have looked them up, but I think prior to 2019, a lot of the um, suicides were older police officers, and those are the ones that were retired that don't have that backup plan, that was all about work, all about the badge, all about the uniform, all about the title. And then once they retire, they didn't have any retirement plans, and now that they go home, who are they going home to? And so they're kind of left with nothing. So with these classes, most of them are bought in already because it's through the NA, and they do have to pay a fee to have the class, but it's mostly just for supplies and everything, and for us to be able to travel to them. But we keep it really intimate. We keep it anywhere from ideally 12 to 20 people. And then we put them in a horseshoe shaped classroom with the tables so that everybody's kind of facing each other, because we need to see everybody's emotions, because when you're looking at somebody's back of their head, you tend to like toughen up, right? Like you're not seeing anybody else like break down or agree with you, or like we like to say in the classes, me too. Like we know like, hey, I'm going through the same thing, and you don't have to explain, but it's just letting them know like, yeah, I get you, or just a head nod kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a lot harder when you're actually looking another person in the eye when they're, basically letting it all out there.
Right. Yeah, because I mean, if somebody's breaking down, most people will avoid eye contact, right? And so when you're in that horseshoe shape, you can't really avoid eye contact. You can't see the quivering of the lip or anything. And we've had some really big breakthroughs in our classes, that people are holding on to a lot of stuff, and that they have never said in front of any of their coworkers, let alone some of their family members, and they just let it all out. And we're holding on to a lot of baggage, a lot of years worth of stuff. Like you've seen and heard a lot, and you're around the same as me, 22-ish years or so.
Yeah. From as far as work, I haven't known anybody at work that committed suicide, but
we know one.
We do?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll have to discuss that later. I can't. Maybe this is a phenomenon that you can elaborate on, but I know you know this, but our listeners may not know this, but I have personal experience with suicide, and the talk of it. This isn't the first time someone had to remind me that I did know somebody that committed suicide that wasn't my dad.
Yeah. Well, he doesn't work with us. He didn't work with us for a while. So.
Okay. So I think psychologically, I've learned to lock it, suppress it. And so anything that has to do with that subject, I kind of put it away. But let's just pretend I'm one of your students in the class right now, and it's my turn to do the testimonial. I know that not every student that's in there is going to have a personal story. They may not know anybody that committed suicide. So, but for me, this because we've been friends a long time. But in 2013, my dad committed suicide. And my dad was part of that old guard generation that you were talking about. He was a Vietnam vet. And he was raised by my grandfather, who was also a vet. And if you knew my grandfather today, you would never believe my dad's stories, because my grandfather treated me and my kids like, a Hallmark movie grandfather. But according to my dad, he was really hard on him, and expected him to be really tough. And I think that was just the generation they were in. But yeah, when my dad committed suicide, it was completely a shock to me, because I knew he had battled some demons. He had some survivor's remorse, and he regretted what he did to cause my mom to leave him. But when I got married and had kids, that was his new lease on life, right? He lived for my kids. He wanted to spoil them, and it was kind of his second chance. So when I was at work, actually, had a first aid training class, one of our every 2-year refreshers that we do.
Oh yeah.
And I got up out of class because my grandma called me, and my grandma never calls me, right? I call her once a week, but she never calls me during the week because she's always like, "Oh, you're so busy, I don't want to bother you." So she calls me in the middle of this training class and says, "You need to come home right now." And I can hear the worry in her voice. And I said, "What's going on?" I was like, "Is it Grandpa?" She's like, "No, it's your dad." I'm like, "Oh my gosh!" So I, you know, I got in my personal car and I drove really fast over there. I got there before the fire department did, actually.
Mm.
And my dad was, I guess it's not too graphic, but I can't say it without being too,
It's
for
okay.
our sensitive ears. If you have kids in the car, maybe you'll want to hit pause or forward the next 10 seconds. But um, I go to my dad's room and he's hanging from
Mm.
the door. He got some electrical wire,
Mm.
wrapped it around his neck, and tied it on to the back of the door. So, and his feet were only like 2 inches off the ground.
Mm.
Um, and I've been on so many suicide calls as a cop. I already know what rigor feels like,
Yeah.
and my dad's, so I cut him down and
Mm-hmm.
I worked on him,
Mm.
and it was more out of a vain attempt, I guess. I don't know. It wasn't like
Hope.
hope. Yeah, that's a good way of saying it. Um,
Mm.
FD gets there and they take over, and it wasn't even a real attempt. I think they knew. And
Mm-hmm.
but when all was said and done, the police who came, my grandfather had told them that I was a police officer,
Mm-hmm.
and immediately um, it was a different kind of customer service. And I hate to say this for people that are not cops out there, but I don't know. There is a professional, I don't say courtesy, but empathy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you see another cop that's in trouble, you're going to feel a personal relation to that.
Yeah.
So their watch commander came, their chaplain came, and I didn't ask for any of these things, but they're like, we're here for you. Are you good? I'm like, yeah, I'm as good as can be. I
Yeah.
didn't show an ounce of emotion. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't until my drive home um, and I think I lived about 45 minutes away that day. I I was I was just stoic. I was like, what just happened? I was in shock, kind of like coming
Yeah.
down from a work high.
Yeah.
And then, I don't even think I don't remember how I informed my wife, but at some point I informed her, and that's when I broke down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is that something similar to other officer stories that you hear?
Yeah. Well, I mean, just right now, you told me things that you've never told me before.
Yeah,
You went into greater detail just right now, just by me giving you permission to tell me everything, and our audience now,
yeah,
So it's stuff like that. And obviously, I'm sure when you go out to other suicide calls, that kind of triggers thoughts of your dad, right? To some extent, sometimes,
yeah.
or just hangings, and it's very vivid in your head. But I think you've been very good about talking and being open. Like, yeah, this is something I experienced and I went through. And that's what's good. It's not forgetting these traumatizing things. It's just knowing what happened and acknowledging it, and then acknowledging your pain, and then growing through it and moving through it. And there's some people that just do not have anyone to
Mm,
talk to,
yeah,
or they just don't want to. Like, you told Liz about what happened, right? I mean, and obviously she would find out because it's her father-in-law.
all right.
But when you experience some of those traumatizing things at work, you don't want to always go back home and let your spouse know what's going on, or what you went through, or what you were thinking, or what your thought process was, because you don't want them to think you're weak, or you don't want to put fear into them, or you're just not an open person and don't think you need to, because if you do, then they might look at you differently.
All right.
So there's some people that are very open from the beginning. They've talked about how they were very close to committing suicide themselves, and some of the steps they went through, and the planning, and that they were so close that they, had their service weapon in their mouth, kind of thing.
Oh wow.
So they really open up a lot. I haven't had a class where somebody's been on that verge, but some of our other instructors have, and they've gotten them help right away.
Yeah,
So
and that's I don't know if we covered this before or not, but we talk about I get our conversations blurred between the podcast and our personal conversations, but
That's okay.
I know you and I have talked about how taboo it is to talk about suicide or if you need
Yeah.
help, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
So for the fact that an officer in that setting full of strangers would come out
Yeah.
and say, "Hey, I've thought about it myself," because I'm thinking if I'm that guy, I can't bring that up because they'll put me up for a psych eval. I'll lose my
Yeah.
job.
Yeah. I mean, the good thing is that, and yeah, you're right. A lot of them are very afraid of saying that stuff because they could lose their job, right? It
Right.
depends on the agency. And some of them handle it a lot better than others. There are some that will put their officers off on leave and allow them to go to therapy. We'll send them, there's like certain, I don't have the names in front of me, but there's certain like camps that you can go to and retreats that you can go to with other first responders, cops, firefighters, even dispatchers, and work through the whole process and be together with a group of people that understand what you're going through. But yeah, it's really taboo to talk about it. Like everybody gets uncomfortable
Yeah.
to speak about it. And that's what I think makes it so much more dangerous. Like we can talk about, and I'm sorry for our viewers, but after years of going through things, you get very, I guess, complacent and a thick skin. And we just treat it like every other day, I guess, because that's our coping mechanism.
Right.
When
You get
we-
really calloused to it.
Right. When we go to some of
Desensitized.
these, crime scenes or we
Mhm.
hear about things.
Yeah.
But when it comes to one of our own committing suicide, nobody will talk about it.
Yeah.
You know, like well, I guess I'll bring it up, but my ex committed
Oh,
suicide a few months ago.
yes.
And there's a lot of people I work with that know him and we're talking about it. Not one person came and asked me how I was doing or how my family member
Mhm.
that's related to him is doing. Not one,
Right.
not one. But then after, if I started bringing it up, oh yeah, by the way, how did that go?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
When you just said that, it reminded
Mhm.
me who we were talking about at the beginning of this podcast.
Yeah.
And you're right. It wasn't in the back of my mind, and
Yeah.
I couldn't even put two
Oh,
and two together.
yeah. Even other people uh that didn't work with him would come up to Danny and ask him not necessarily how I was doing, but how he committed suicide or
Mhm.
do we know why?
Right.
You know, not, I mean, he hadn't been working at our agency for a long time, but yeah, it was a lot of them knew him and knew the story, and not one person said anything. And, you know, it is what it is.
Yeah.
I'm not angry about it, but it just makes me realize like we can talk about everything under the sun except for our own members when it
Right.
comes to being vulnerable and asking somebody, genuinely asking them how you are doing, you know.
Yeah. I remember when that happened. I think Danny, your husband, told me first,
Yeah.
and I think the immediate concern was whether or not you were going to tell your daughter,
Mm-hmm.
and then when he did, how that was going to happen. And I remember we're just kind of having a group chat about that, and the decision was obviously yours, and
Yeah.
I don't even know if we provided input or if it's not even our place to put in input, but I didn't work with him. I knew of him just based on the little conversations that we had. But one of the thoughts I had personally was, the thoughts, the memories that you brought up were not always positive memories of him.
Yeah.
When this happened, your attitude changed completely. It was more, you had different concerns, and it was concerns for him, his family, and then concerns for you, for your family. So it's funny how when something like that happens, and it sucks that it has to happen that way, that
Yeah.
it causes us to
Yeah.
have different feelings and emotions and stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is what it is. So he wasn't directly involved with my daughter's life, but at the same time, he took away that opportunity from her knowing him.
Right.
And so that's where I was more concerned. Like at this point, even before that happened, I didn't hold any ill will towards him. It's just, we just didn't see eye to eye on things. And everything happens for a reason. And I'm very grateful that he stayed in his lane and I stayed in mine, and Jason was brought up the way she was. But I was not upset for me. I was upset for her.
Yeah.
Because, she planned having an opportunity to meet him, and that got taken away. But in doing so, we were able to meet other family members who she's never met before. And they were very sweet and very welcoming. And, so it gave his mom the chance to meet her granddaughter, which she said she'd been praying for all her life. So and as ugly and as gruesome that time was, that brought some closure and some peace to the grandmother to be able to meet her granddaughter.
Yeah, I guess you're right. And maybe that's how people have to cope with that stuff. Because one thing when we bring attention to people and suicides, one thing that we fail, I shouldn't say as a profession, but as a people, to mention are the survivors, right? The people that get left behind, they're reeling too.
Yeah.
And what you just said, and in my personal experience, you're absolutely right. You have to look at the silver lining, the hidden blessing behind the tragedy.
Yeah.
Or else you're going to go down a spiral yourself.
Yeah. And that's what's so beneficial about this whole resiliency class, is that's exactly what it is. You can either continue to go down this downward spiral and surround yourself with unhealthy habits, or you can choose to what we call like a suicide, an activating event, right? It gets you feeling a certain way. Recognize how you're feeling and say, okay, either I can start hitting the bottle myself to numb my thoughts and to just get me to pass out or think differently, or I can deal with it. I can go work out. I can go talk to a friend, a family member, even a therapist. I've done that before. It's not scary. It's not like how they make it seem on the movies. And you can just go through that process and choose to think about things differently. Like I said, like, yeah, although she didn't get to meet him, she got to meet his brother, her new uncle, and the grandparents, and all these new connections that she didn't have before, kind of thing. So you have to just look at things differently. You can't, if you recognize you're starting to spiral out of control, you need to stop and decide, do you want to continue to go down that tunnel and that hole, or do you want to start climbing yourself out of it? And so that's when you need to really look at your friend group and your family members and start having those open, vulnerable conversations with them too, because they're not going to know if you don't tell them either.
Right.
And expect people to read your mind. So.
Yeah, I guess you're right. It does help. And it happened. Like I never intentionally said, "Oh, I'm going to call Kristen and Danny right now, and they're going to be my therapist." It just happens at the most random times too. I forget how I even brought it up with you guys, because in 2013, I guess we were all kind of hanging out, weren't we? I don't know.
No,
we weren't quite hanging out yet.
We were. No, I don't think for either him or, not to go into that topic either, but your mom.
Yeah. I
know I was working that day, but we still weren't hanging out just yet.
Right.
We did like a few years after.
Yeah. That goes to show how good of friends we are, because it feels like it's been forever, but but and in both, I know you guys know more intimate details than the average person does, because I don't know, I just felt comfortable talking to you guys about it, but I don't, it's not like we set it up that way. It's like, hey, can you guys come over? I need to talk.
Yeah.
It just, it just comes out at random moments. And I think it's important that when you have that feeling to want to talk about it, that you reach out to someone.
Yeah.
And luckily I have you guys. I made a post recently, and I thought about you and Danny specifically, but I have a lot of friends. You have a lot of friends, but the real measure is how many friends do you have that would answer your call at 1 a.m. and would, wake them up from sleep. Like, let's say you have a plumbing emergency. How many friends can you think of that'll say, hey, I know I can count on Danny to bring his pipe wrench and he's going to help work on this with me.
Yeah.
And I can't think of I can count on one hand how many of those friends I have. I
Mhm.
can count on, I'd have to have a calculator to count how many people I'm friendly with, how many people I'd invite to a party, how many people,
Yeah.
I'd hang out with. But there's a real difference with people that you can be vulnerable with,
Yeah.
um, you know, share
Yeah.
emotion with. So I think, where I'm going with this is it's important to have that support group. And I know a lot of police departments are kind of slow with this. There's
Mhm.
some agencies that do a really good job. They
Yes,
have,
there are.
yeah. I went to Supervisory Leadership Institute, and I had a small group because it was COVID. And I think there
Mhm.
was 13 of us in the class. Normally there's like 25. But almost every department that was represented there had a peer support group.
Mhm.
And it was looking at they were talking about their policies. They were talking about some of the incidents that they had. I'm like, wow, what little investment they put in really had paid off tenfold in the
Yeah.
amount of stuff they were able to
Mhm.
provide help with people.
Yeah.
So it's just, it's mind boggling today. These stats, this stat came out
Yeah.
3-4 years ago, that police officers are at the highest risk for suicide of any profession. It's mind boggling that agencies today still don't have a wellness peer support program.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's starting to become more prevalent, I think, because of all these stats and because I think of the demand of change and everything else. So there are some that already have it, like you said, already thought out, put out, and are doing amazing things. Um, I know the NYPD has one. They even have an app for it with all these like cool connections and resources on there. So that way you don't have to go to someone in your agency if you're still not comfortable doing it. I think a lot of people and some agencies too, the issue is that the admin puts somebody on the peer support team
Mhm.
who is there just to check the boxes and not who's on the team because they really truly care about it. So, for example, I think what turns people off too is that who might be on the peer support team. But what
Yeah.
they don't understand is like, say, obviously I'm not everybody's cup of tea, which is fine. Me and my partner, Melissa, are going to be going to a peer support class to get it started. And hopefully now that there's been some changes, our department will start adopting it. But the difference is that we might help get it started, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're the go-to peer support people either. So what some of our classes had suggested, and now what we suggest to other classes, is when you're beginning to do that, you go to each of our, like, say for our agency, we would go to each department and or the briefings and say, hey, I want you to write down 3 names of people at this agency who you would go to if it hit the fan, and write down your name. At some point, there's going to be a couple repetitive names in there because there's somebody that a lot of people kind of gravitate to for whatever
Right.
reason. So that's going to be some of those people you want on your team. And then obviously I can help out with officers to some extent,
Mhm.
but obviously I've never been in a shooting. I've never been there. I've never bent over like a dead body or, a dead child or anything like that. So you want somebody who's willing to talk to others about that as well, because I can't say, I know how you're feeling, Aram, I get it. No, I freaking don't, because I've never been there before. Now I can help with dispatchers on the other side dealing with like shootings and that kind of thing, or having a spouse in there, that kind of stuff. So
Right.
you have to find different people that have been through different things to be on that team, or at least know that like, hey, I can connect you with this person. They're willing to talk to you about that. So that's what they have to keep in mind too. So hopefully it starts changing for the better. If not, one of the things that we tell people also is, like you mentioned, you have we call it the board of directors. And it's basically, like you said, you can call me and Danny at 1 a.m.
Mhm.
and we'll get in our cars and we'll go to wherever you need us to go. But you also, kind of like younger kids, you know where to shop around if you want a certain thing, right? You go to mom or you
Yeah.
go to dad. So I know I can go to you guys about anything and everything. I also know I can go to my friend Melissa if I'm having an idea or if I'm second guessing myself, and she's going to tell me the truth. I know I can go to my dad if I want like something built, or I'm looking at a construction, or if I need to know something like direct about the Bible or that kind of thing, like it's just, who to go to. You
Right.
also can put people who have passed away, like say like your grandmother, like what would my grandmother say about this?
Mhm.
And you can think about it that way. She can be on it. Some people that you cannot stand can be on your board of directors too, and be like, oh, I do not want to supervise like that person.
All right.
Am I going down that tunnel? Yeah, that's exactly what that person would do. And I swore I would never be that person too. So
I get your analogy, and as you were talking about it, it started to make sense. When you said board, I'm just thinking maybe a group of people, but in reality, a board has its specific officers, right? You have a CEO, you have a CIO, CFO. You have all these people that have their specialties. So you're right, like you specifically said. If I have a Bible question, I'll go to my dad. If you have maybe a financial question, you'd go to your accountant friend, someone that that has an expertise in something. And if we think about it, just if you give time to think about it, just in the 2 minutes you were explaining that board analogy, I was popping people I would fit in those roles in my head. So I think you're right. It only takes a couple minutes of thinking to ourselves to do that. So it's probably something that we should all do. And maybe
these
I don't
people
know.
don't need to know they're on your board either.
Well,
You don't
that's
need to
interesting.
tell them.
That's interesting, because I was about to say, like if you came, I don't know. I think if I told a couple friends, I don't want to say flattery, because that's not the goal we're trying to accomplish. But if I told them, like, hey, listen, I really value our friendship, and I think you have something valuable to offer here. And I feel like I can talk to you when things come up like that. I just want you to know that if I ever reach out to you, it's not a random thing. This is because I think very highly of you. I think if I was the person receiving that information, knowing that this person wouldn't have said something like that unless they may feel they may have to talk to me one day, I would probably, my responses to anything that he or she does in the future might be a little bit more empathetic, maybe come from a different place, as opposed to like, why are you bothering me, dude? And now that I know, well, you're bothering me because you think highly of me. You came from a place where you thought about this, that you needed to talk to me for a reason. So I don't know, maybe my response and my approach would be different. I don't know.
Yeah. It varies. I mean, you can let them know. Another thing that we tell people too is how often do you show gratitude for those people that mean a lot in your life?
Yeah. No,
right.
I'm the king of taking things for granted.
Right. Like, I mean, because we just assume like they know.
Right.
Like, yeah, Downey knows I love him because I married him. Right. He should know that. But how many times do you actually say like, oh, like, thank you for, like with Liz, thanks for all your arts and crafts. Thank you so much for painting that wall. It looks amazing. Or putting our studio together. It looks great. Or, and one of the toughest things I think for our class is we make them write, we kind of trick them into it, but we make them write a gratitude letter to their closest person, or the person that has made a big impact on their life. Again, it could be anybody. It could be somebody who passed away that you never were able to say that to, or somebody that's near you, like your wife, your kids, a coach, a teacher, somebody like that. And then we make them take it a step further when we tell them like, okay, so for your homework tonight, now you're going to go and you're going to call that person and you're going to read it to them. And then you're going to come back tomorrow and tell us how it is. And yeah, we have some people that come back and they don't read it to their partner, but they read it aloud to the class and they break down because they're just letting all their emotions out and their gratitude out. So it's not horrible tears. It's like happy tears, and they're just feeling that release. So
maybe a little
it's
guilt
really good.
too.
Yeah, maybe a little guilt too, because you never do that. Like some people, they kind of already do that with their spouse, which is amazing. Others don't. And they're like, why are you doing this?
Yeah. I
find it odd.
I
which
think
is sad.
It is. And I think it's our profession, because we're all macho. Even the ladies are macho, right? We have to,
yeah.
I don't know. Maybe we need to change that. But I don't know. I feel like I remember in the academy when they said, this job is going to change you. Personally, I thought, nope, it'll never change me. I'm very strong-minded. I'm going to be the same happy-go-lucky guy from day one till the day I retire. You watch. And I think I was that way for about I don't know, 15 years, 12, 15 years, I was the silly guy at work. Right. And even recently when I started my social media journey in 2015, it was all silly. Right. You and Danny sent me some TikToks this morning. And I was thinking to myself, I could do that, but I can't. I don't have it. It's not, it's, it's not, I don't know. I feel like that part of me is not there anymore. And obviously in the last 7 years, I've lived a lot. My life is, I don't say harder, but I went through all the tragedies that a person would experience in their lifetime a couple times in a short amount of time. And I feel like that part is out of me. And then especially with what's going on in law enforcement today, the public sentiment, it's just, I don't feel right. I made my social media reputation as being a police officer. Now it just wouldn't be right if I made it all about being silly still. Right. I think people want to see a different side of law enforcement. Totally, but probably not that side right now. They probably want to see more of someone that's committed to go out there and bridge that gap that's been fractured. But I kind of went off on a tangent there, but I think as a profession, we feel the same way. I think a lot of guys probably couldn't withstand some of the callousness that happened. And they are callous. We're hardened. We're told, not to be. And then at the same time, you go to the academy and they tell you that you will be, it'll change you. So you just go with it. We went to a dead body call. I think you were working where the body had probably been dead for over a year in that house. He was just a skeleton. I think most people, the average person would go there and think that that scene was horrific out of a horror movie. And, we're just standing out there and, maybe had a different response to it than the average person. But now that we're talking about it, that's not normal.
No, it's not normal. And that's what people forget to, it's not a normal response, and we weren't built for that. But yet here we are, and here you are actually going there and seeing it. And I always find it so ironic that the media will interview these victims, like from a shooting or something that we're witnessing it, right? Oh my gosh, I'm traumatized for life and blah, blah, blah. And they're crying while they're being interviewed. And it's been at least hours after that, right? And some are empathetic, some are sympathetic to what they're going through. Oh my gosh, that poor person's going to be like messed up for the rest of their lives. I can't believe it, blah, blah, blah. And yet we see like the domestic violence day after day after day. We hear it day after day after day, and we get so used to it. And it becomes so natural to us to just go from one call to the next call, just like it takes the normal person going from work to home. They no longer notice the street signs or the people walking on the street or the buildings and the businesses or anything else, because it's not new to them anymore. It's, so they need to really understand, like we see and hear a lot, and it does a lot of internal damage. I guess it's kind of like scarring, right? You kind of build up like a callus to it because it's been so repetitive. And when it comes to law enforcement, not every call is going to have you break down. Sometimes it just takes years of it. And then finally it's like the breaking point, right? Like your backpack, if you were to like throw everything, one of our partners does everything like with a bucket, like, so I have like this freaking bucket, whatever. So you have like, just like different little stressors, right? So you have like something at home, and then you have, I don't know, a murder, and then you have all these things, but you're holding it over your head. So he holds all this thing, this guy, Danny's like amazing. And he went through a lot of stuff too. And it's just like, at some point, this is going to get too heavy. So either you're going to drop it on your head, or you're going to make the choice to like set it down and like take everything out, be like, yeah, I have a lot in here, and this is what I went through, but I'm not going to carry it with me anymore.
Okay. I mean, I'll buy that, that you have to take that out. But how do you take it out? Like, how do you take it out? You have to talk to somebody, therapist.
You have to acknowledge that you've been through a lot of stuff. Like all of us in law enforcement have some type of traumatic story, and we can't compare our story to somebody else, right? Because we all feel different ways and different about different things because of how how we grew up, the neighborhoods we grew up in, the parents we had, this kind of thing.
Right.
So when you get to that point of breaking, you need to just, like we said, take it out. So you need to acknowledge, talk to somebody, have that breakdown, even if it's by yourself, and then be like, this needs to change. Like, this is too much. And if you don't feel comfortable going to your work, because maybe your workplace is one of those ones who'll be like, give me your gun and badge. We're not going to let you be out and patrol anymore. That is stripping away from an officer even more. And that's going to push them even further towards that, like, suicidal thoughts, or into depression, or further into the alcohol, that kind of thing. So there's a whole bunch of different, like, people or counseling teams that you can reach out to that work through your insurance or work just through cash. So that way you don't have to report it through work and you can work through that. Or that's when you need to, once you kind of get used to opening up to your spouse or to your friends, like your board of directors, like, you know who to go to and be like, dude, this last baby death, like, took me over.
Right.
It freaking took me over. Like, this brought back all these memories of this and this and this, and it's just too much. And through talking about it and through acknowledging it, it's like a weight off your shoulders instead of just bottling it all in.
Yeah, it's funny you say bottling it all in, but that's what we're expected to do, right? Especially the public sentiment today. Back in the day, let's just say I've heard stories of older officers when they responded to domestic violence before Vine, before all the domestic violence laws. If there was a man that beat his wife, the officer beat the husband in front of the wife. That was police justice back then. If that were to occur today, the officer would be in trouble for not showing restraint. So what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to bottle it all up. I remember when I was in patrol, I would tell my guys, this is when those First Amendment people first came out with video cameras. They would go in officers' faces with cell phone cameras or video cameras, and I have a right to be here. You can't. And officers didn't know how to react to that. They would respond, and they didn't know the laws. They didn't know that we're actually in a publicly owned building. They can be videotaping on our
right.
But officers would argue and fight with them. So my advice to them was, hey, don't let it bother you. You should be operating as if a camera's always on you.
Right.
So if you think about that, for 12 and a half hours, these guys can't be themselves. They can't show their personality. They can't say what they want to say. They have to hold it all inside. And eventually that's going to spill over, right?
Yeah.
And it may not always spill over into suicide. I know that's so extreme.
Yeah.
But your marriages are affected. I mean, you probably know a lot more.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And that's when we have to acknowledge, like, I have to let this out somehow, my aggression out somehow, or just vent or whatever. So it's phoning a friend and venting on the way home, which is kind of like how this podcast started, right? Like, we're venting in the car, or going to the gym, or going for a run, or if you want to go and have like a casual drink with your coworkers and like vent about whatever happened. Or like you said, sharing with your spouse, or, going hiking, going camping, like taking time off from the job. It's just a whole bunch of different things you can do, but you have to be careful when you are around, I just want to say, around other first responders. If all you do as first responders is still talk about it constantly and all the negativity, you're not really like letting go of it either. Like, if you carry around that black cloud everywhere and that's always what you're focusing on, then it's not going to do you any good either. Does that make sense? Like,
because you're just surrounding yourself with misery. Misery loves company.
Yeah. And you just can't always live in the negative. That's when you get it out of your system, and then you move forward and then talk about other things.
Probably why it's healthy to have friends that are not in this profession. And it's kind of hard because you have to find someone that can understand you, but they can't relate at the same time. But maybe someone that's just willing to listen. Because talking about it helps. I can tell you from personal experience. I don't care if they understand completely, because they may not have experienced it, but just getting it out helps. Like, it was only until last year that I could talk about my mom and dad without crying. And I would, anytime I talked about it, I would cry, and I would cause other people to cry. So I stopped talking about it.
But that's just them sympathizing or empathizing with you,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
they're just sharing your pain.
But I can tell you that mm, it gets easier, and I feel in a much better. I was in some dark times, and I feel much.
Mhm.
I guess I don't want to say healthier because I don't think I was unhealthy, but my outlook is brighter.
Different mindset, maybe.
Yeah, well, I was reluctant to do things, and now I'm branching out, taking more
Mhm.
risks,
Yeah.
and I'm not afraid to be. Um, I guess maybe it's because I was an only child, but I always wanted to be liked. I always cared about what people thought of me,
Hmm.
and it was embarrassing to tell people what happened to my parents. Just,
Hmm.
it was embarrassing, and but now I'm like, hey, this is what happened, because I think there's more good that comes out of talking about it than bad, so I don't mind.
Yeah.
And I'm not too proud of a person where I can't talk about it.
Yeah. And just being that vulnerable and now being that vulnerable on a podcast, I bet you now you're giving permission to other people to reach out to you because you said that. And they're
Yeah.
either going to do it in person when they always find you in public, or some of your friends, maybe they're listening to this like, hey, I didn't know that many details about it, or, hey, I kind of feel the same, whatever it is. But now you're giving them permission to be vulnerable too because you open that door.
No, you're right. Yeah, and I didn't think about it that way. And when you said that, I got the chills because um, I did have somebody else who I've shared this story without on my social media
Hmm.
reach out to me and tell me that he was going through personal struggles. And I don't think that this person would have ever talked to me because we pass each other. Hey, what's up? Hey, what's up? How's it going? Good. All right. We don't hang out. We don't talk on the phone. And yeah, we had a deep talk. So
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
probably, you're right. It does open it does let your guard down, I guess, right?
Yeah.
The wall, hey, he's willing to
Yeah.
talk about it to strangers. Maybe he'll talk to me about it.
Yeah. And that's the main thing is like when we hesitate to share our stories, we don't do it because we think it'll show that we're weak. But when people, and I bet you as they're listening to this now, they're like, I don't think Aram's weak. I think that's courageous. So when we on the outside are viewing you share your story, we see it as courageous. So other people, if you want to share your story, it's courageous.
Mm.
You're sharing that and you're opening that door and you're giving others permission to be like, hey, if they can do that, I can do that too. It's okay.
Right.
And so it creates that safe space. So like you said, when somebody opens up like that in our classes, it's just it opens the door for everybody, and the floodgates just open, and there's so many things that people are going through.
Right.
So
Well, if you are one of those people and you don't feel comfortable to reach out to Kristen or myself, Kristen is an expert and I have personal experience. We are willing to listen. We may not be able to get to your direct messages right away, but you know, the certain messages do stand out. We scan them, and then the ones with the preview message that stands out, like, hey, I need help or I need to talk to you about this. Those are the ones
yeah.
I get directed to. The ones that are like, hey, can you share this? Can you bring up this? So, I'm like, no, we're going to skip that message because time is valuable. But
Yeah.
if you don't feel comfortable talking to us, or you can't get to us right away and you need to talk to somebody, there is a national suicide prevention line, and it's manned 24/7. And that number is, you can Google it. It'll show up on your phone as a first listing on the first page. But if you happen to be near a pen and paper, the number is 800-273-8255. 800-273-8255. And that's National Suicide Prevention Line. It has nothing to do with your work. They're not going to contact you. You can be totally anonymous. They're not going to track your phone. It's just a place where people who volunteer their time to listen are going to sit there and listen. Our crime analyst, I don't know if you know this, Kristen, but our crime analyst, Cynthia, she's retired from law enforcement. She contracts to do our crime analyst, but she spends volunteers 4 hours, 4 days a week at a suicide prevention line.
Nice. I did not know that.
Yeah.
Cool.
And in my mind, I'm thinking they're just sitting there and maybe they'll get 1 or 2 phone calls, but it's about as busy as a dispatch center, apparently.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I bet. And then I have a few to share. One is through the FBI. We work through Acadia, and that's one of our speakers also. So I can connect you with them. They work with your insurance, like I said, on and off the insurance books, if you will. There's another one I had grabbed from our work. It's called the Counseling Team International.
Yes.
And there's also First Responder Wellness. So any of those you guys can look up. Just Google it, and Acadia Health, thecounselingteam.com, and firstresponder.wellness.com. So there's a whole bunch of help out there for you. Yeah, hopefully this kind of helped some of you guys out.
Yeah.